Hi everyone, it's Dr. Corey. So I wanted to follow up on the post I made yesterday about testing for COVID-19, whether it's a PCR swab or antibody testing. Because here's the question I'm getting a lot of. People want to know, I want to go see my parents, I want to get back into the world, I want to go out, am I safe? And unfortunately, the answer is not straightforward, and we just don't have enough data yet, or the tests aren't exactly where we want them to be able to definitively say, yes, you're safe. So what I've been telling people is you cannot hang your hat on a negative test. You cannot hang your hat on a negative RT-PCR test, which is usually the nasal swab. There's oral swabs and some GI. The PCR tests are actually looking for protein from the virus in that sample. So you can't hang your hat on a negative PCR test or a negative antibody test. And I'm going to tell you why. What you can hang your hat on is a positive RT-PCR test. So if you get a nasopharyngeal swab and it comes back positive, then you are positive for COVID-19. That test is pretty accurate in that regard in terms of positives. Where it's not accurate is the negatives. There's a lot of false negatives. And this is why. It's not necessarily because the test is bad. It's usually because if you're asymptomatic, you're not going to have enough of the viral particles in your nasopharyngeal cavity for it to be detected. So that's point number one. Point number two is that the swab is actually, you have to collect it properly. The swab has to go like way back up in there, and it has to rotate around for 2 Mississippis in each nostril. And a lot of times that's not being done. And the oral swabs and the ones where they have you cough just aren't as accurate. So it's more of an issue with the collection and having enough viral load, which is not going to be as common if you're not symptomatic. So just because your swab is negative doesn't mean you don't have COVID. And that's part of the tricky thing about it, especially when people are potentially asymptomatic carriers, which we're seeing more of that on the antibody tests. So the RT-PCR, to summarize again, you're actually swabbing to get pieces of the virus, and it detects it, and it's accurate if you have it. What we're looking for in the antibodies are, once you've been infected with the virus, you produce antibodies to the virus. And that can be anywhere from a week to 3 weeks after you start having symptoms. The tricky thing is we know there's a potential latent period where you can be infected but not have symptoms. And we used to think that was 3 to 5 days, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks. It keeps going further out the more we learn about this virus. So in general, you'll produce antibodies about 1 to 3 weeks after being infected with the virus. Those are IgM antibodies. Those are the earlier phase antibodies. And then you developed IgG antibodies. Those are the later phase antibodies. And those are the ones that you want to see, meaning you're moving towards resolution and potential immunity. For how long? We don't know. But that's what we want to see, IgG antibodies. It means you're not shedding the virus anymore, you're not infected anymore, and you're theoretically immune. Those start to develop generally after about 3 weeks. So ideally what we want to see on an antibody test is only IgG. That's what everybody's gunning for. But what we're seeing, what our results are showing, is that we're seeing people have the IgM antibodies for a lot longer, which means they're still actively shedding the virus. So that's going to prevent you from going to see your parents if you're actively shedding the virus. The other thing we're seeing is just a lot of people are negative for the antibodies. And again, if you are just curious and you never really had symptoms, it's unlikely, or I've yet to see it, that somebody just shows up with IgG. Like they were asymptomatic and now they're immune. Where I'm finding the antibody testing to be helpful is if you've had a positive PCR. So if you were sick, you got tested, you know you had COVID-19, then check your antibodies, because especially after about 2 to 3 weeks, because that'll tell you if you're still in the active phase of the infection or if you've moved on to the immune part. So if you have positive PCR, meaning you got a positive diagnosis, and now you just have IgG antibodies, you're pretty good. You're a safe person in that sense. So the more data, the more tests that we do, the better in terms of being able to start determining what the results mean, because there's a lot of ways to interpret them. And the technology and the testing is changing rapidly too. What I will advise you against is do not do rapid testing for antibodies. The rapid test or the lateral flow, the technology they're using for that has a lot of false results. And those are the ones that the FDA approved right out the gate. Those aren't good. What we're hearing is that the chemiluminescent antibody testing is the most accurate, and so hopefully we'll see more of that rolling out. And there's also ELISA testing. So there's a number of different ways that can be tested, but the finger stick and the rapid results, don't do it. Don't waste your time. Don't waste your money. It's just going to create confusion. So I hope that clarifies it a little bit. I found that I was like answering this question every day, and I'm sorry it's not super straightforward, but you just have to know if you get a negative test result, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're negative, and you have to still still do all the things. We all need to still be doing all the things. So okay, happy to answer any other questions that you have. We are still doing antibody testing here a couple times a week. I'm also part of a consortium of about 100 doctors now, where we're putting our heads together and doing a lot of information and interpretation around all these results and what they mean and what we're seeing clinically. And if you are sick or know somebody who's sick, I'm doing virtual COVID consultations to make sure people are doing the right stuff and keeping them out of the hospital. So, all right, everybody, take care. Happy day. Stay healthy.